All right, I think we're going to get started here tonight. Welcome everybody to the Red Barn. Go ahead and find a seat and we'll get going here. Or if you want to go grab a drink first, Rebecca's over there waiting for your orders. Welcome everybody to our Red Barn event tonight. My name is Joshua. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the community programs manager here. In the back there we have Jeremy, who's helping out with our tech, making sure that people at home can see this streaming or it's recorded for viewing later. And then Rebecca, our programs director, is serving drinks over there. So how many of you all here, this is your first time coming to a Red Barn event or to a WI program? Wonderful, wonderful, awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming. And thank you for everyone who's come to other events for coming back. We're always trying to figure out ways to expand our audience and reach new people. So I'm glad that this event is reaching a few more new people to come to it here. So we're a nonprofit with a mission to connect people, communities, and the natural world. And we do that through both our youth programs, where we bring kids here to our campus to learn about the environment and nature, our after-school programs, and our traveling naturalist programs, where we'll travel down the valley and up and down the Columbia River to bring the education to the schools that can't quite make it all the way here. And then we also have community programs like this Red Barn event. We have workshops and nature walks, and you can see a couple of our events that are coming up here. And our big Spring Bird Fest will be the third weekend in May. So if you're interested in birds or just curious about birds, that's a great event to join. Another aspect of WRI to connect us to this land in this area is by, before any program, we read our land acknowledgement. So I'm going to read that here for you all, and I'm going to switch over to this slide that shows some of the traditional lands, traditional territories. This land acknowledgement was created alongside the Shimpersquatchie people. We're spreading the message that they wish to spread to the public. The land Wenatchee River Institute sits on is the ancestral homelands of the Shimpersquatchie, Pasquosa, or Wenatchee people. The Shimpersquatchie, meaning people in between, had villages positioned along the Wenatchee River and surrounding areas. Their ancestral homeland extends from the Cascade Ridge throughout what is now known as the Wenatchee and Okanagan valleys. The culture and economy of the Shimpersquatchie people centers on taking care of the land. They fish, hunt, gather roots and berries, basket-making materials, and medicines. The Shimpersquatchie are named within the Yakima Treaty of 1855. Language to establish the Wenatchee Reservation was never followed through, even with the needed surveying completed. Many Shimpersquatchie now live on the Colville Reservation, 150 miles northeast of Leavenworth, and they were forced off their land here, and the U.S. government moved them to this reservation. The Shimpersquatchie people are still alive today. They continue to practice their culture, and harvest their traditional foods and medicines, and hold their ceremonies passed down from their ancestors. Most people won't see or notice them, but they continue to be on the land they are connected to. Their traditional language is in Hampchin, an interior Salish dialect. And I'd like to welcome you all by saying hello in their language, Tilhusht. We offer this land acknowledgement as the first step to amplifying Indigenous voices and recognizing the harm done to them as a people. We stand as an ally to recognize their connection to the land and their rights to practice their culture on these sacred lands. And we encourage all to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the place you call home. The Wenatchee River Institute is committed to sharing this land acknowledgement and following up with other actions to educate and be respectful. All right. I would also like to thank our sponsors. We're not welcoming, they're not here. But thank our sponsors who let us or allow us to have these Red Barn events. So North Central Washington Audubon Society, Sleeping Lady Mountain Resorts, Ludwig's German Restaurant, Leavenworth KOA, Just switch over there. Okay. Ryan House, Obertal Inn, South Restaurants, Leavenworth Outdoor Center, Orion River Rafting, Icicle Brewing Company, Munchen House, Leavenworth Chamber of Commerce, and Syndicate Smith. So yeah, without these sponsors, we wouldn't be able to run these Red Barn events. So thank you to them. Last thing to mention here before we get going. Sorry, I'm scanning right here. So we are always working on trying to get feedback from people, know how we can make differences, how we can just bring programming that people are looking for. So this is an opportunity for you to scan this QR code and give us a little bit of feedback. We always appreciate that feedback. It just helps us know what's going on, how everyone is thinking about what we're doing and putting on. So you're welcome to scan that and fill out a little form and just send that on to us. All right. Now to our first speaker. We have multiple speakers tonight here in store for. But our first presenter, after 15 years on the backcountry trail cruise in the North Cascades, Ana Maria España turned to writing. Her 9 award-winning books explore wilderness, work, community, and history. Ana Maria's work has been recognized by the Society for Environmental Journalists, the Nautilus Book Awards, and as a 4-time finalist for the Washington State Book Award. She lives with her wife, Lori, in Stehekin and teaches at Wenatchee Valley College. So let's welcome Ana Maria España out.
Thanks for being here. What a beautiful night, and so nice to see so many familiar faces and new faces. Thanks to Wenatchee River Institute. What amazing work they have. What a beautiful place to spend this evening. And of course, to A Book for All Seasons. I say it before, I will say it again. It's the best local bookstore you will find. I go all over the country to local bookstores. None are better in terms of their selection, their support of authors, and their customer service. I call them every other week ordering a book, and I hope that you do too. So thanks to A Book for All Seasons. Yeah. We are here tonight to celebrate trails and wild places, and to advocate for trails and wild places, and mostly to tell stories of being out on the trails. And so when we were thinking of all the ways to do this, which we had a million ideas, I hope you're ready to stay till 1 in the morning. One of the ideas we had was to share book recommendations. So we, the readers, the 4 readers, have recommendations about trails, for the trails, around wild places, but we would like yours too. So as we're speaking, I'm gonna circulate this clipboard. Amy's gonna have it first, so you may not get it because she has a lot of recommendations. So please share yours. We will be sharing ours. But also, I'm looking at the faces in this crowd and also assuming because you're here, you spend time on the trails. So before we share our trail stories, what I'd like you to do just for 5 minutes is turn to the person sitting next to you and tell a memorable story from the trail. Any small story, because we only have 5 minutes. It can be from a city park, it can be from way back in the wilderness, it can be from when you were a little kid, or it can be from a week ago. So share your stories. Tell a story. What do you have? Tell a little story about being on the trail. It's okay? The mic okay? All right. I am rudely interrupting your stories right in the middle of the good part. Half of the fun was watching you all tell the stories because people were like, and then, like, and this happened and that. Right, all of the gestures were amazing. I'm sorry that people live streaming missed that part of it. I am curious, now I'm in my teacher mode. I'm curious what like ideas or themes or elements come up when you start telling stories about being on the trails. Anything that came up in your stories? Bigfoot. All right, good. Non-human beings, always. Someone else. Friendship, right? Relationships. What? Personalities, right? The humans among us, the non-humans among us. What else?
Near misses.
Near misses, right? Yeah. What else?
Pay attention.
Pay attention. Yeah. What else?
Being cold and being hot.
Being cold and being hot. Yeah. What
I was
else?
going to say things going wrong, but then it turns very funny.
Things going wrong and the humor of that, right? The adventure of it, the unknown of it is part of it. What else?
Making ice cream back on the trails.
Oh my goodness, yes. Get done and get back to the ice cream, right? All of those things are fantastic. I think sometimes when we talk about going out on the trail, we have a very limited idea of what we're supposed to think about. We're supposed to have a field guide and have our facts and our Latin names that we get. And then there's another crowd that's like, no, I got steps. I got to get up to the top. I got to get to the top of the mountain. But that's not why we go out on trails, right? We go out for the friendship and the kinship and the unknown and the fear and the humor and all of those things. And so I should say that we are ostensibly here tonight in support of this wonderful anthology, Stories from the Trail, put out by Homebound Books, a wonderful publisher. And three of us, Iris and Abby and I, are contributors along with some other wonderful writers telling stories of the trail. But we all have very different experiences. And that's the beauty of having four of us here to tell stories. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first reader tonight, who is my friend Abby Braithwaite. She lives in Ridgefield, Washington, where she writes from a converted shipping container in the woods overlooking the family farm. With the soundscape of sandhill cranes, coyotes, and freight trains keeping her company as she writes, her essays on parenting, escape, and disability can be found around the web, as well as in the print anthologies, Places Like Home and Stories from the Trail. She has 2 self-published chapbooks of poems and tiny essays, Contained, and a portrait of the artist as a Crone Tree. She is a volunteer facilitator with Right Around Portland and the initiator director of the Plas Newydd Farm Arts Initiative. She shares her home with her husband, 2 teenagers, 2 cats, and a dog. And I will tell you lastly that I met Abby as we both climbed into a kayak together for 5 days in the San Juans, and there is no one better to be in a kayak with. She is a marvelous kayaker and even better storyteller, so Abby, it's all you.
Thank you, Anna Maria, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I do write about parenting. And I couldn't bring my kid here tonight. She's a senior in high school and doesn't like to miss school. But I brought some pictures of her. Hopefully they won't be too distracting. And I will say writing as a parent is a complicated thing, finding those lines between your stories and your kids' stories. But the greatest compliment I could get with this was when I read this first with my daughter, and she read her parts of the dialogue. She laughed so hard. Apparently I nailed it. And I really wanted you to be able to hear her read it with me, but I'll do my best to bring her voice. So improvise, stabilize, stagnate, repeat. Mom, let's go up there. You don't want to go just a little farther on the flat? No, up there. Adara stomped her foot, jutting her chin toward the near vertical slope to our right. An expanse of loose rock, dead grasses, and spring glossy poison oak led up the hillside above us and beyond to the top of the Central Oregon Rim Rock. At 4 foot 6 inches tall, Adara was far smaller than your average 13-year-old, but every bit as self-determined. She huffed again, tossing her pink bangs off her close-shaved head, standing firm. That way, now. Enunciating every letter sound in a way that would have made her speech therapist so proud. All right, let's go. The fact that an entire species has banked our survival on the teenage brain is a mind-bender. Never mind the fact that our existence depends on the risky twist of genetic mutations across the millennia. That first amoeba family could have trucked along blob-like for an eternity, comfortable in its amorphousness, and populated the planet with slime. But no, some type A couple of perfectly good cells had to go and mix it up, complicating the next generation with replication and random assortment, and things just went from there. Improvise, stabilize, stagnate, repeat. Evolution in a nutshell. I followed Adara up the side of the hill, one hand on her backside, urging her upward. Her muscles tensed under my hand, her right glute half the size of her left, the result of a long-ago surgical repair on a bad hip. And I wondered if she likes this kind of climb because it's a break from the crooked pound stumble that is walking with one leg an inch shorter than the other. Maybe, like the short-sighted mountain goats in the old comic, she knows she's built for side hilling. Or maybe she just likes to do things the hard way. A Google search on evolution as risk hits on Darwin's dangerous idea, the threat posed by the once newfangled theory of evolution to the human understanding of our roots and our place in the grand hierarchies of life, and evolution of risk about the evolutionary role of adolescence and the importance of risk-taking, of the risk-taking brain of a 16-year-old to our collective survival. But why evolve at all? Why not just stay the course? A species grows from the mire, defines itself, settles into a niche. Lizards swarm out of a pond and across mucky soil, right up to a cliff. The daring ones creep to the edge and fall in growing numbers, and the lizard population is suddenly on the brink. A cold wind blows across the scales of a dozen lizards hanging back from the edge, and on some cellular level, a strand of DNA buzzes, and bam! Scales grow into feathers, feathers grow longer and find their purpose, and instead of falling, one lizard flies, lifting on a thermal, rising up the side of the cliff. And so arrive birds, born of mutations that build on themselves, improvising, stretching, evolving. We were spending a few days at our family cabin on the Deschutes River in Central Oregon. A cable ferry carries you and everything you need for however long you're staying across the swift-moving river. It's fiercely cold in the winter and impossibly hot and dry in the summer. In late spring and early fall, it's mild and lovely. In April and September, it's all those things in the span of an afternoon. With no internet or cell reception and limited creature comforts, it's a love it or hate it kind of place, especially for teenagers. Adara is on the hate it end of the spectrum. But we ply her with potato chips and let her smuggle her phone over the river for music, and she puts up with it. And every couple days, I manage to get her out for an exploration. And so, some number of millennia and branches of the tree of life later, we arrive at the human species. Like many living things before us, plant and animal alike, we figured out we had to spread out to mate. Maple spinners dance on the breeze, creating space between the mother tree and her offspring. Thistles catch on the coat of a wandering beta wolf, and so propagate new thistle fields on the other side of the mountain. The scent of ripe berries on the breeze brings a feeding frenzy, and berry seeds are shat out in myriad piles across the watershed. Travel to make babies. It's a basic principle of procreation. Humans complicated the formula, birthing babies that stay helpless longer than any other animal's offspring, and we became programmed to nurture, to tend, to need each other. We built intricate social structures, interdependency, emotional attachment. And now we're supposed to get far enough apart to mate safely, to ensure the mutations that would lead to increased variability and strength, rather than the unstable genetics of an insular community. "I can't do it, Mom," Adara shouted, her third attempt at a handhold rattling down the bank behind us. We'd made it through the hardest section, and the ground under our feet was grassier and less rocky, but still steep. "You're doing great. Look how far we've come." She turned around to look down, scared herself with the sheer drop, recrossed her arms. "That scared me. I can't do it." "Well, we can't sleep here, can we?" I asked, attempting the light humor that sometimes shifts her mood. "And look, we're almost there. I want to show you two choices. Either one is fine. We can keep going straight up this way," and I point to the rocky draw she's been following, tracing a straight line between us and a budding oak tree. "Or," gesturing off to the right, "we can follow the sneaky deer trail. I know it looks like it's going the wrong way, but it twists back around, I promise." Enter the teenager, a creature designed to cast out on its own to points unknown, with a particular penchant for pushing away the very people it has depended on most since entering the world. Human adolescence, that risk-taking, precipice-walking, edge-living phase of development, carefully designed to carry us away from our community, to mix with others and create new family lines. Equipped with the skills, knowledge, and strength to set forth for new spaces and places, but not yet with the wisdom to worry about what's coming. With the power to plunge straight ahead to the next thing, without the discernment to think, maybe there's an easier way just around the corner. Adara didn't even look where I pointed, not interested in the so-called easy way. The picnic rock sat just out of reach, there under the young oak, and she was determined to get there, her way, straight up the hill. So we pushed on. Mom, I need your hand. Kiddo, if I hold your hand, I'm gonna pull you down the hill. Here, I'll just hold your, fine, I can't do it. She plunked back down, tossing a sharp rock out of the way before she landed. It just missed my kneecap. And I'm not a kiddo, I'm 13. I took a deep breath and looked out over the river. We were so close. I just needed to keep my mouth shut. We would get there. Adara was born with Down syndrome, a genetic mutation that causes a triplication of the 21st chromosome. And as a teenager with a developmental disability, she inhabits the brink of adolescence more precariously than others, toddling in an instant between a deep dependence, still needing help to zip a zipper, tie a shoe, and a fierce desire to do things her way. Adara's emotions are wild and churning, fast-moving like the rapids below our cabin on the Deschutes. But they're persuasive, and they're honest, and they did eventually get us up to the shade of that little oak tree where we ate potato chips and built fairy houses in the dust before heading back down to the cabin for dinner. When Adara was a baby, our midwife told us that there are people who believe that Down syndrome is the next evolutionary phase of the human species, that the emotional intelligence that is a common trait in Down syndrome is exactly what we need to survive the challenges in front of us right now. Life with Down syndrome isn't always easy, Adara will be the first to tell you, but it's full of deep joy and connection. And I have to wonder, watching her navigate the world with the resiliency we all should envy, what would happen if we could all weave a little of the ways of that bonus chromosome into our dealings with ourselves and each other? Perhaps we've achieved a place as a species where we can choose some of our next adaptations, where we can choose to evolve a new way of being together. Adara is nearly 18 now, on the cusp of adulthood. Over the past 4 years, I've watched her navigate the grief of a global pandemic in her first few years of high school with grace and honesty. She's determined to finish high school, go to college, and live in an apartment on her own. She dreams of a career in first aid, inspired by her own medical journey and countless hours watching emergency rescues on YouTube. That old hip injury is making noise again, and she reminded me when we were ice skating last week I needed to call the surgeon. A total hip replacement is on the horizon for her, just as soon as the pain catches up with what her x-rays read. They'll lengthen her right leg then, too, and straighten out the crooked gait she was left with after her last surgery. She has an alarmingly high pain threshold, and what pain she does feel now is transitory. Her doctor has said that as long as she's still walking, running, riding her off-road electric trike, we can hold off on surgery. We'll know, he promises, when it's bad enough that it's time to take the next step. I wonder if she'll still prefer side-hilling when her legs match.
Will you tell us what your book recommendations are?
Sorry, my book recommendations, yes. So first of all, she had that surgery, and man, that kid can walk. So what did I write? I wrote on the paper. Annie Dillard was my first discovery, as when I was 18, and I thought certain ways, and then I reread the book recently, and I realized that Annie Dillard thought certain ways, and I read the book when I was 18. And then, so that was The Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. Heather Durham's The Sylvan Crone, which is just out right now, which was kind of like reading my own life, but without the babies. Ross Gay's Book of Delights, always a favorite, every time I need to touch back into the joy and wonder of things that are out there. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, who just, whatever she writes, has beautifully intertwined the world.
I need help. I knew how to do it, and then I forgot how to do it. So Josh will help me get the slides changed. We're going to switch, as I bring Iris up, who has spent time in Stehekin, as have I, to a series of slides taken by our friend Nancy Barnhart, a photographer from Stehekin, who prepared these for us. So I want to give a shout out to Nancy as I introduce Iris. Iris Gravel has lived in Washington State for 4 decades plus after childhood and early adulthood in Chicago and small towns in southern Illinois and Indiana. A longtime Quaker, an environmental and anti-racism activist, and a retired nurse, Iris believes everyone has a story to tell. She's the author of 2 collections of profiles, Hands at Work and Bounty, Lopez Island Farmers, Food and Community. Her memoir, Hiking Naked, and essay collection, Writer in a Life Vest, each received Nautilus Awards. In 2018, Iris was named the first writer in residence for the Washington State Ferries. Sometimes you'll still find her writing on the Inter-Island Ferry as the vessel courses through the San Juan Islands. Iris, is an old friend. We've known each other for 30 years plus at this point, and I have always admired her dedication to storytelling, not just her own, but whole books of stories about other people, about other people's passions, and most of all, the inspiration of her own dedication to the heart and the intimacy and the craft of writing. So thank you, Iris. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna Maria. I was going to use my time to gush about you, my writing mentor, dear friend, and the most generous writer I have ever known. And also as a former backcountry trail crew member, I feel certain that she maintains some of the trails that I hiked on and that I wrote about in this essay. But I also want to thank folks here at the Wenatchee River Institute and the bookstore. I too think that's one of the finest small bookstores, local bookstores, right after the Lopez Bookshop. And I've had the pleasure of reading here a few times in the past and interviewing another author here, so it's really a delight to be back here and to see so many of you here this evening, so thanks for being here. The essay that I'm going to read is from this collection. It's called Wild Sanctuaries, and so I'm going to read from that now. And for those of you who have read the memoir Hiking Naked, you're going to get the real condensed version, plus what happened after we left Stehekin. Wild Sanctuaries. As I rounded what I hoped was the hike's final switchback, a clump of blue at the trail's edge caught my attention. A rumpled t-shirt rested on top of khaki shorts and boxers. Beside the clothes, a large pair of hiking boots. My eyes glided up past the boots' red laces, the dusty wool socks, the hairy legs. My husband, Jerry, one hand on his walking stick, the other on his naked hip, gazed off into the distance, his chin upturned, his mouth curved into a smile. "Want to hike with me to the lookout?" he said. Just the night before, we'd sat in a campground in the tiny village of Stehekin, Washington. You all know it, population of 80. Jerry had read aloud from a guidebook about the next day's hiking on the Goody Ridge Trail. Surely he'd read me the entire entry about the hike, including the part about 5,000 feet of elevation gain in 5 miles. But what I remembered as we set off the next morning was the promise of a level top with a 360-degree panoramic view of North Cascades peaks. What I'd forgotten was the guidebook's rating of the hike as strenuous, with the trail going up steeply and remorselessly in woods with few views for the first 2.5 miles. But it was a well-maintained trail. An hour and a half into the hike, I had sounded like our kids on a long car trip. We hiked onward without talking, the trail now worshipful. Soon we glimpsed the sparkling blue of Bridge Creek nearly 1,000 feet below. Several switchbacks later, we sighted jagged ridges carved by 180-million-year-old glaciers that seemed within an arm's reach. The blue-gray shadows of dozens more marched for miles toward the horizon. As we paused, I said a silent prayer of thanks for this time in this place. Here, every summer, a week-long vacation alone with Jerry had given me needed times of quiet. With our twin son and daughter in the care of Jerry's folks in Oregon, the solitude and slowed pace helped me open to the spiritual voice I relied on for guidance. At home, that voice was muffled too often by taxiing the kids to school, soccer practice, the orthodontist, by worries about the mortgage and grocery bills, and by frustration with my work as a public health nurse. That year, our 9th return to the mountains, I needed solitude as much as ever. As the trail re-entered the woods and zigzagged steeply, my thoughts started to roil. Soon words tumbled out, voicing fears of failure in my job and uncertainty about whether I was doing what I was meant to do. Jerry offered supportive comments and alerted me to mountain peaks visible where the forest opened up. Though weary of replaying those old tapes, I was at it once again. And once again, he listened. Eventually, the trail's upward course stole the air from my complaints. I shifted my focus to the cramps in my calves and the heaviness on my back. "Now how far?" I had asked, as Jerry's blue t-shirt and khaki hiking shorts disappeared around a switchback. "Oh, just about 1.5 miles, he called back over his shoulder. Head down and shoulders hunched, I wheeled my feet forward, seeing nothing but rocks and pine cones under my boots. "Damn it," I said out loud as a tree root snagged my shambling steps. When I could no longer hear Jerry's footsteps, I figured he was already at the summit, surveying the sweep of mountains, river, lake, and valley listed in the trail guide. Instead, he was silently disrobing. His playfulness and courage once again helped me move forward, fully clothed. My spirit lightened. I wouldn't realize until a few years later, when Jerry and I had quit our jobs and moved with the kids to that remote valley surrounded by North Cascades National Park, that the trek to Goody Ridge had been the start of my journey to regain the spiritual footing I'd lost. At times, I felt I was the one who was hiking naked. During our 2-year sojourn in Stehekin, I often trekked into the woods behind the house, our tabby cat Boris leading the way. Channeling his tiger ancestors, Boris stalked through pine needles and scrambled over boulders that had rumbled down from mountain peaks over the centuries. I ambled, inhaling scents of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, exhaling out 3 journals worth of questions about life, death, work, and calling. One day, I stopped to study the whorls of green lichen on the sloping knoll I dubbed Boris's Bluff. I sat on the rock's highest spot, warmed by the sun breaking through the cottonwoods on their ascent toward surrounding peaks. If not for the slice of sky visible through the canopy, you could believe the world ended right there. Boris curled beside me as I wrestled with questions about nursing. Did my work make any difference? Could I stay in this system so driven by the budget ledger? Had I lost my compassion for those in need? I craned my neck and stared at snowy peaks towering 5,000 feet above. Unexpectedly, a calm rippled through me. I sensed that Boris and I weren't alone. All I heard was my gasp of awareness of a divine presence and an unexplainable feeling of connection with all people. I grasped that I have my part to play, but it's not up to me alone. The carving effect of melting snow and ice, the river's rush, and new growth after a forest fire had taught me that the smallest touch, the briefest contact, the quietest diligence can make a difference. There, I embraced both my smallness and my greatness. Near the end of our time in Stehekin, I still yearned for time alone. One July day, I rode my bike to the trailhead of a bluff known only to the locals. Although shorter than the hike to Goody Ridge, the switchbacks here were steeper. Even without Jerry to spur me on, within half an hour, I made it to a point open to the sky above and the head of Lake Chelan below. Sunshine lit the water, turquoise blending into dark blue along the shore. I found a grassy spot and leaned against a smooth, rocky mound. My gaze followed the upper portion of the lake, its shoreline twisting and turning like the pattern of my thoughts. I realized that, like many searchers, I'd be leaving this valley with nearly as many questions about work and calling as when I'd arrived. But now I felt easier, both about charting a direct course, like the lake stretching below, as well as navigating the coves and narrows along its route. The next month, we moved to a rural island in the Salish Sea of Washington State. Here, 27 years later, long practice urges to control, protect, and seek approval resurface more than I'd like. At those times, I turn again to hiking, now with little elevation gain, a yellow lab named Booker as my companion. Pebbled beaches and woods are my sanctuaries here. One awaits at the end of an arched tree path that follows along saltwater-lashed cliffs and past firs, their wind-twisted trunks bowed toward dried beach grass. Across the Salish Sea, the Olympic Mountains shimmer on clear days. Bull kelps swirl and tangle, colliding with each other until wedged between cedar and madrona limbs, bobbing in the frigid shoreline's hollows. I imagine the Coast Salish peoples of the past, fishing for salmon and gathering gin-scented juniper berries. Here, with the trials of daily life substituting for the challenges of elevation, I continue to seek the divine presence as I learned to do in those times of nakedness in Stehekin. Thank you. You want me to remember those books I told you? Kathleen Dean Moore, many.
What is it?
Comfort.
Wild Comfort.
Wild
Look, she's got
Comfort.
the
Oh,
cheat
good.
sheet.
Thank you.
I got
Thank you.
the cheat sheet. Yeah.
And she's got several other books that I mean I love all of them. And then your teacher friend Laura Pritchett. Wildfire. What is it again? Playing with Wildfire. I wrote an essay about baptism by wildfire. Her essay collection is Playing with Wildfire. And all of the people that Abigail mentioned and that Anna Maria and Claire, I mean, there's just fabulous work out there. But those were the two I limited myself to. Yeah. So.
Thank you. And I hope the list is still circulating. Xander can't hold it forever. That's not allowed. Yeah. Thanks, Iris. I am up next, and I have chosen, I do have a piece. I hope you buy the book and read the essay in Stories from the Trail. It's actually about a hike I took with Nancy Barnhart, the photographer. We spent the pandemic hiking together, trying to find new places in a place where we had lived for a long time, and it was quite magical. But tonight is a night when we're celebrating trails, and I wanted to go back to my very first book, Now Go Home. It came out in 2004, and it's largely about my experiences as a trail worker. And right now is a time when we really need to be thinking about and supporting our trail workers. And I felt like I worked trails for a long, long time, but there are people in this room who worked a lot longer than I did on trails. So I'm preaching to the choir here, but I want to say a few things. First, trails don't make themselves. They don't just appear. And a lot of people I know who are really avid hikers really believe that. They're like, no, the animals make them, and you know, the indigenous people had trails. All those things are true, but they take maintenance. Trees fall every year, rocks fall every year, erosion happens, bridges fall. They need maintenance every single year. I also have friends who go out and they say, oh my God, have you been up Company Creek? It hasn't been maintained in 1,000 years. I say, we maintained it last year. The Forest Service was in there last year. That's how a trail looks when it hasn't been maintained. You need trail workers. And I love volunteers, and I'm so glad people want to volunteer in our national parks and in our Forest Service land. However, they can't do the work. It takes skill, and it takes stamina. You need the dedication. You need the job security for trail workers right now. So again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm going to stay on my soapbox one little minute longer. Because I worked most of my career for the National Park Service. And I think people here know the difference. The National Park Service is America's great idea, and it's elevated, and it's the golden child in lots of ways. When government loses funding, everybody says, oh, our Park Service, park rangers don't have their funding. And I'm so glad they say that, and they bring the funding back to the parks. But you know who it doesn't go back to? The Forest Service. The Forest Service, right? The Forest Service does not get that attention when they need it. And we are surrounded. So Washington State, I looked it up, has 1.7 million acres of national park. How many acres do we have of Forest Service wilderness? Not just Forest Service land, but Forest Service wilderness. Somebody in this room should know. How many million acres? 3.3. 3.3? 3.3. Even Gary's wrong. It's 4.3. Oh, no, it might have parks in it. Oh, man, I knew Gary would get me. Anyway, twice as much. Even the wilderness is twice as much as the parks. We need to support the U.S. Forest Service. We need to support our professional trail workers. So with that, I'm going to go back. And I thought about reading an essay about the beginning of my trails career when it was all quite romanticized, but instead I'm going to read an essay from the end, where it turns out it's still quite quite romanticized. This is from my last season on trails. I'm going to read the beginning of it, skip the part that's on the trail, sorry, and then the end of it. And there's also a character in here who I call Smitty. And it was a time in my writing career where I felt like I had to change people's names. And when Artie Olson read the book, he said, "I'm Smitty. Why didn't you call me Artie?" So I'm going to call him Smitty here, but anybody who knows, it's Artie Olson, and among other trail legends, Artie Olson is a trail legend. So this is called Near the Mountains. I was sent to the west side of the park early this spring. Oh, and it's real hard on the west side. Sorry for the west siders. Yeah. I was sent to the west side of the park early this spring before the snow had melted off the trails, before I normally would have had any reason to work. Despite the paycheck, I took the assignment as banishment and whined considerably. The west side, the wet side, receives 120 inches of rain a year. Most of it seemed to me to come in March. The only advantage would be the chance to see some people I had known a few years earlier before I abandoned the rich and loamy for dust and pines. The barn that served as trail headquarters in Marble Mount was blandly unchanged. Hand tools, shovels, sledgehammers, axes, hand drills, and horse equipment crowded spider-webbed corners. The smell of musty hay mingled with baked-on coffee. Rain spattered on the roof continually. The trail crew straggled in, somber and familiar as the setting, wearing Levi's and logging boots, oil-stained wool shirts, suspenders. They greeted me warmly. Then we settled into gathering equipment for the day. While they stuffed sandwiches and rain gear into battered day packs, I shyly noted the changes since I'd seen them last. Thicker forearms, deeper calluses, more scars. It should be no surprise, I told myself. It's not as if the work hasn't changed me too. When I first worked on the west side of the Cascades, I was 23, injured, working as a dispatcher in the fire office. Even though I was cooped up inside, I was glad as hell to have a job. I was glad as hell to be there. I could feel the closeness of the mountains even through the fog, even as I sat at the computer, watching condensation drip from the single-paned windows and waiting until 2 o'clock, when the backcountry rangers stationed at lookouts would call in their daily weather reports. 68, they might say, partly cloudy. I could picture it up there, cloud shadows skating across heather-cloaked meadows, occasional sun on the remaining snow on the north slopes. I could hear in the rangers' voices that they knew they were lucky. I knew it too. I knew they would spend their days walking for miles along ridgeline trails crowded by huckleberries growing ripe by the hour, by tiny subalpine firs fighting for unclaimed ground. I knew they'd spend their evenings writing in the lookout logbooks long, heartfelt tributes to the mountains or the writers who had been stationed there before, Kerouac, Snyder. Even so, even though I would have given my eye teeth to be perched above the trees reliving Snyder's spirituality, Kerouac's hyperbole, I knew that backcountry rangering wasn't for me. The young backcountry rangers took their jobs a bit too seriously. As if being above the trees so much of the time, they considered themselves above other things, like work. So busy were the rangers hiking and enforcing rules that they didn't often have to get dirty. I did not want to be above anything. I wanted to get dirty, filthy even. The trail crew was dirty. Every other Tuesday, they would hang around the barn, packing up for their 8-day hitch. I'd ask about where they were headed, what their projects would be, and plain envy must have shown on my face. On one of those mornings, after the crew had left, one of the supervisors tried to distract me. "If you could have any job in the park," he asked, "what would it be?" "Trail crew," I answered. He groaned. "You seemed so smart," he said. He recounted stories of the trail crew carrying 2 heavy packs. He described the injuries, gory impalements, back surgeries. He fell silent for a moment as I answered a radio call, then continued the litany. Gruesome deaths with cables and ropes, falls, drownings, plain, mysterious disappearances. I was grateful for his company, but I did not listen. The next year, my knee was completely recovered, and I went to work on the trail crew. So then we go to work in the chapter, and we skip all that. On the ride home from work, the mountains glowed pink in the fading sunlight. Between the aptly named peaks, terror, desolation, forbidden, snowy ridges were spotlighted, creamy, so close and inviting. Mike, the driver, and the skier stared in awe, his eyes darting upwards from the curvy highway. "Look at that," Mike said. Yeah, we agreed in silence, but watch the dang road. I figured that would be where it stayed. After all, we all know too well how far it is to those ridges, the technical skill required to reach them. Up front, Smitty, that's Artie, feigned sleep, his head tucked against his bunched up shirt, leaning against the window. Another jag in the road jerked him awake. "Look at that," he said. "Wouldn't you just love to go up there? Maybe for a week, stay spiked out? God, it'd be nice, wouldn't it? I'm gonna get some of those new plastic ski boots. Where'd you say we could get those, Mike? I'm going to Vancouver this weekend. I'm gonna buy myself a pair and no taxes." That's all over. "Will you write it down again? Exactly which kind?" "Sure," Mike said, "sure." "Then we can go up there and ski, all of us." Smitty looked around the rig. We all nodded vaguely, gazing up dreamily and sharing in Smitty's rare, spontaneous fit of camaraderie. I was surprised, and I was pondering the growing respect it takes to live this way, with wilderness as very nearly, but not quite home. The honeymoon passes, the hay grows musty, the callus is thick. Maybe we can't live in it, what we hope for, but we can live in the hope, weathering the weariness and the injuries and, well, the weather. I realized that, of course, I knew why they'd stayed all these years, the same reason I had, not for the mossy pride or the mortgage, not because it's east side or west side. This job, this life is full of romance. "Yeah," Smitty continued, "a spring sunny day like this, I'd be up there with my fleece jacket zipped down to the navel." We stifled giggles, though it made a strange sort of sense. Sure, this isn't California or Colorado, not the sort of place to gavort without a coat. Still, there are moments, rare ones, when you might venture to unzip it. "To the what?" Karen asked finally. "What did you say?" "To the navel!" Smitty roared. "To the navel!" Karen repeated in mock salute. "To the navel!" Mike and I echoed. We fell into hysterics, laughing as we descended back into the trees along the river, knowing that tomorrow would likely bring rain, as would the next day and the next, watching the alpenglow fade, not even considering how very long it might be until we see it again. Thanks. And my book recommendations. First of all, Deer Park Ranger. I was hard on rangers there for a minute, but Jeff Darren Muse worked in North Cascades for many years and has a fine collection of essays on manhood and being a ranger and all of the things that happened largely in our neck of the woods. Also, Salmon Weather by C. Marie Furman, a wonderful poet, just now has her first collection of essays out, mostly set in Idaho, truly beautiful. And hearkening all the way back, I was thinking about Encounters with the Archdruid and that scene where they go up on Miners Ridge to Miners Ridge. And I was thinking about, well, should I recommend it? It's kind of old, I don't know. And I opened the New Yorker, and there's a wonderful piece in this month's New Yorker where Elizabeth Colbert is celebrating that particular section of Encounters with the Archdruid, where they go to Miners Ridge. And one last one before I bring up Claire Thompson. Black Faces, White Spaces by Carolyn Finney talks about the need for diversity. We look at this room, we look at the places that we love and the trails, and we don't see as much diversity as we'd like to, and she really explores that in that wonderful book. So with that, I'm going to introduce Claire, but I forgot my little sheet, so 1 minute. Yep. I quit working trails 20 years ago. Claire may have quit yesterday. We don't know. We're going to find out. Claire Thompson has been a seasonal trail worker for over a decade, first in Colorado and since 2016 on the Okanagan Wenatchee National Forest out of Leavenworth and Iniat. She teaches English at Wenatchee Valley College and has a master's in environmental studies from the University of Montana, where I met her pre-COVID, just barely pre-COVID, and is currently pursuing an MFA in nature writing from Western Colorado University. She has published work in High Country News, Terrain, Parabola, there, outdoors, and elsewhere. Claire likes to write about disturbance, ecology, human-land relationships, and most importantly, I think this evening, the impacts of cultural and climatic change on outdoor labor. Come on up, Claire.
All right, I'm dangling my weird technology here. I didn't know I was supposed to come with a technical outfit tonight. Thank you so much, Anna Maria and Wenatchee River Institute and Iris and Abby. Anna Maria is a huge reason that I am here tonight and that I'm here at all writing about this work. She's the first person whose work I discovered that really, I was like, wow, this person gets it, writing about trails and trail work. Yeah, I think it's interesting, Iris, that you talked about your struggles reckoning with your nursing career in your essay, and that really resonated with me. I feel like as a public lands employee right now, I feel a lot of solidarity with nurses, teachers, social workers, so many other people in our world right now who have been doing this work that is so important to our society, but is so taken for granted often. And there's this reliance on our own dedication and our own passion and this expectation that that's going to be enough. And I think we're reckoning as a society with whether that is enough. Anyway, okay, this is like a condensed version of a longer piece. It's the end of another long week at the beginning of my first season on a Forest Service trail crew. I'm exhausted from my first backpacking trip of the summer, carrying a chainsaw, fuel, and a 2-night pack up and across a 7,000-foot ridge. It's been just me and my coworker Dan for the past 2 days, but on this final afternoon, another member of our crew, Ross, has hiked up from the other side to help us finish out the Icicle Ridge Trail. For the past couple of days, I've achieved a state of cautious collaboration, even occasional camaraderie with Dan. We've traded off the chainsaw every tank of gas, as is the crew's custom. And at some point this morning, after I'd been running the saw for a while, he even remarked that the work was going faster than he'd expected, which I interpreted as a sign of approval. I'll take any I can get. But now Ross is here with more gas and bar oil, and suddenly I'm outnumbered again by more capable men. Ross has brought a chainsaw with him too, and he and Dan monopolize both saws from here on out. I fall so far behind them, I can only hear the whine of their saws in the distance on the switchbacks far below me. They're cutting brush with abandon, leaving me to swamp it all. I have to trek up and down the steep trail, making several trips back and forth to the only decent opening to dump the cut ceanothus, while the saws keep screaming, generating more work. I can't hike as fast as I'd like to anyway because of new boot blisters that make every step painful and some lingering stiffness in my right ankle from when I slipped on a sleet-soaked rock last week and twisted it. Every time I hear a chainsaw rev again, I despair. I consider calling Dan and Ross on the radio, asking them to give me a chance to catch up, but I can picture the look on Ross's face, his disgust with me and my incompetence. I hit a blessedly brush-free section of trail and pick up the pace, seizing the opportunity to close the gap between myself and the chainsaws. I step funny on a root and roll my bad ankle again. The sudden pain is no match for my exhaustion, and I guess I'm glad the boys aren't here to see me cry. That's when I start thinking, what would happen if I just quit? It's been a rough season so far, as the only woman on a crew with 5 men, and the least experienced on top of that. I've gotten my ass kicked on a daily basis, but by what feels like a pointlessly masochistic work pace. It hasn't been easy, but this afternoon on Icicle Ridge has crossed a line. I start rehearsing my resignation speech in my head. When I finally reach the bottom and we head back to the ranger station, our crew lead has already gone home for the weekend, so my resignation speech can't be served fresh. And instead of refining it over my days off, I go to REI and blow 1/3 of my paycheck on a new down sleeping bag, so my backpack will be lighter on the next trip. By Monday, my shame has faded into something like determination, a drive to prove myself, but on my own terms. I don't quit. Instead, I return for 6 more seasons. I clear that same stretch of Icicle Ridge twice again, and I make it a point each time to bring a female coworker with me. Those last 2 miles to the trailhead still feel interminable, but I've never had any urge to run. On Icicle Ridge, I risk running into ghosts of my former selves. That is the pleasure and peril of traveling, of working the same trails over and over. It's like entering a house you used to live in, or having occasion to visit your old high school, or ordering a drink in a bar you used to haunt and catching vaguely familiar reflections in the mirror above the dusty bottles. Any place you spend time will retain some whispers of other working versions of yourself, snagged and left lingering like mist around cliffs. The part of Icicle Ridge we clear with chainsaws is a 7-mile stretch of what is in total a 30-mile trail, most of the rest of it designated wilderness. In some places on Icicle Ridge, you might be only a handful of miles from civilization as the crow flies, but some of its high basins conjure a bottomless aloneness, a ghostly feeling smoldering in some meadows like the coals of a forgotten fire. A few years ago, camped on the high, lonely part of the ridge between the Index and Painter Creek drainages, trails traveled more rarely with every passing season of accumulating deadfall. Xander and I made a small campfire of larch twigs in the rocks. It was our 4th season as coworkers and our 3rd as something more. While we did our best to remain discreet about our relationship, determined not to let it jeopardize the job we loved, we tried to plan at least one work trip every season that would be just the 2 of us, when we'd share a tent like a normal couple and fall into the rhythm that had brought us together in the first place. This time we were traveling a forgotten stretch of Icicle Ridge, doing more scouting than sawing as we made tracks to meet up with the rest of our crew. Huddled around the firelight, watching a pair of ravens swoop and circle high above the Index Creek Valley, we were startled by a sudden percussion of hoofbeats just behind us. We whipped our heads around but saw nothing, and the sound faded as quickly as it had clattered out of the darkness. It seemed louder and less dainty than a deer, we agreed. It was after dark. We had passed no other hikers for hours, and on our way up from Index Creek, we had scrambled over, under, and around enough downed logs to turn back even the most skilled rider or packer of stock. We looked back toward the source of the sound and then at each other. Xander wiggled his eyebrows. "Sylvester," he whispered. Albert Hal Sylvester, the first supervisor of the brand new Wenatchee National Forest in the early 20th century, and the most influential of the government-sponsored mountaineers attempting to chart this part of the Cascades, spent a lot of time on Icicle Ridge. It was Sylvester who named dozens of peaks, creeks, and features in the rugged heart of what would, decades later, become the Alpine Lakes Wilderness. The frenzy of naming and mapping of land across the West back then was a symptom of colonialism, in its implied assumption that no names yet existed for long-known places, and in the sense that maps themselves facilitated land theft. But to men like Sylvester, not to mention Gifford Pinchot himself, the famed founder of the Forest Service, the government owning the forests was better than leaving them open to a corporate free-for-all, at the mercy of the timber companies or the consuming maw of the railroads. Things never change. Sylvester spent some 4 decades exploring the newly designated national forests of the North Cascades, for work and for pleasure, mostly on horseback, and it was there on Icicle Ridge, not far from the lake he named for his wife Alice, that he met his end. When Xander and I heard the ghostly hoofsteps behind us that night, we were camped within a few miles of the place where Sylvester had fallen to his eventual death, at a spot he had surely passed countless times in his decades of wandering and mapping. It's easy to imagine him and his horse, still riding this country after all those years, not so much haunting as caretaking, paying his respects to the places that shaped him. Sylvester's ghost wanders these mountains as an invisible presence, but you'll meet visible ghosts up here too, the skeletons of whitebark pines that dominate the highest meadows. A dead whitebark pine, which many of them are, looks haunting or haunted, or maybe both. Bark bleached white like bones in the desert, and if it's been through a fire, those bones might be white on one side and charred black on the other. Cutting a dead whitebark pine that has crashed across a trail will dull your handsaw fast, and its splaying limbs make it unwieldy to drag out of the way. The ghosts of the forest that was and the forest that could have been. Beetle outbreaks and blister rust have decimated whitebark pines, and historic fire suppression hasn't helped. Without periodic disturbance clearing out sick trees, infestations endure and spread more easily. Shade-tolerant species like those beautiful ballerina straight subalpine fir slowly encroach on whitebark pine territory in the absence of surface fire, shading and crowding out a species that's used to having all the sun to itself. Fire suppression was the original official impetus for Hal Sylvester's place-naming frenzy. It was much easier for early firefighters to locate and put out blazes if they had accurate maps with named features. Sylvester clearly got carried away and had fun with it. In addition to Dirty Face Peak and Dishpan Gap, there was the succession of summits he called Poe, Bryant, Longfellow, Irving, and Whittier, mountains today known collectively as Poets Ridge. But Sylvester's prolific naming worked all too well. Now that long legacy of fire suppression has altered the ecology of the very places Sylvester loved and thought he was protecting. Dan eventually left the trail crew for better career opportunities in firefighting. One day, years after he'd gone, I found a note filed away in a binder of old trail reports that he had written about Icicle Ridge. After word got out that we cleared this trail in 2016, it became a local favorite, the note began, before going on to detail the logistics of the trip so a future trail crew could replicate it. Even in his penciled scrawl, the pride in our achievement on that long ago trip was evident. And suddenly reading that note, I wondered if I had it all wrong. That trip over Icicle Ridge with my blisters and too heavy pack and the infernal brush and the chainsaws revving relentlessly while I rehearsed my resignation speech, I'd always thought of it as my lowest moment, as potent proof of my incompetence that I couldn't hack it. But maybe that's not how Dan remembered it. To him, it had been a success, one I had been part of. That last afternoon notwithstanding, it was Dan and me who had cleared the bulk of the trail. Maybe instead of proving that I didn't belong, that trip had been the beginning of proof that I did. I didn't let that afternoon make me quit. Instead, I continued to watch and listen and labor and learn. I learned to take pride not in pointless suffering, but in doing good work. There's a fine but firm difference, I think, between hard work and masochistic misery, and I've picked away at it ever since, trying to figure out how to share that pride of toughness with future green crew members, how to separate it from the shame and exclusion I felt. I don't want to be like the freshman who is miserably hazed, only to become a senior who does the next generation even worse. But I do want the people I work with to know the joy of achieving something that once seemed intimidating, and of doing so not simply for the sake of stoke or bragging rights, but for a purpose larger than themselves. To embrace hard work, to push yourself and feel proud of it, that's what Icicle Ridge taught me to strive for. So when I sense the ghost of myself passing through those groves of white bark pine skeletons, I give her a nod. I don't want to forget her. Am I supposed to talk about my books? Okay. Excellent. Yeah. You did a great soapbox, Anna Maria, so I'm going to leave it at that. All I will say is I feel like we are on the verge of losing an entire vocation that is really important for who we are as humans trying to survive in this modern world of capitalism and technology and total disrespect for our relationship with the land and everything that is not us as humans. I think everyone here who has been on a trail, whether it's in a city park or in the wilderness, has experienced that feeling of being in a trail, being part of what makes you feel connected to the rest of the world. And losing that opportunity really scares me. So that's my soapbox. And my books, I will say what's cool, I noticed some people put on the list some books that I was thinking of mentioning, so you already covered that for me. Dad, you mentioned The Last Season. That was going to be one of mine. I think it's by Eric Blem is his name. Great book. It's like sort of a true crime missing person saga, but at the same time does such a good job talking about what it's like to be a lifelong career civil servant of our public lands and kind of breaks down all of the benefits and drawbacks of that. Finding the Mother Tree, Suzanne Simard's memoir about being a female scientist in the logging industry in British Columbia in the 80s and 90s and trying to get her research about the way trees cooperate and share resources taken seriously. Another one I was going to mention, if you have any young readers in your life or even for you, I reread this book as an adult and loved it, is a book called Chasing Redbird by Sharon Creech. I read it in like middle school maybe, but yeah, it's about a girl who is processing family grief and discovers an old abandoned trail on her family's property and decides to spend the summer clearing it. And when I remembered that I loved that book as a kid, I was like, huh, interesting. Makes a lot of sense. So those are mine.
Yeah. One of the great things about Wenatchee River Institute's mission is that when we give a presentation like this, they ask us to offer you something to take with you, action plan, right? Go out in the world, and you have heard part of that action plan loud and clear, which is to support our public lands, to support the U.S. Forest Service, and to support the stewards, the professional stewards of our public lands in every way that you can, by voting, by calling, in all of the ways that you can. Please do. The second part, and I think it is equally important, and it has to do with our theme here tonight, is to tell your stories. Tell the stories that you told each other of being out on the trail, of the marvelous things that happen on the trail. I will tell you, I am married to a woman. And the only reason that I am able to be married to a woman is because about 12 years ago, people told their stories, right? They told their stories. They came out of the closet and they talked to they were aides to the Supreme Court justices. They talked to their congresspeople. They talked to their Republican uncle. And they came out and they said, look, I want to get married. And who can say no to that, right? So go out in the world and say, I walk on these trails. Like, I care about these trails. They changed my life. My daughter loves walking on these trails, if there's a side hill. Only if there's a side hill. Yeah, so that is your action plan. And also, one last thing. Trail work is a wonderful kind of work that we do with our hands, but there are many other kinds of work that people do with their hands. And Ira Scribble has this gorgeous book, photographs and profiles of all different people who work with their hands. And because you came tonight, some of you get a door prize. And if you turn around and look on the back of your chair, if you have a little pink slip, you get a copy of Hands at Work. So who has a little? Anybody have a little pink? You do? Woohoo! All right. There's a copy of a book. Xander gets a copy of the book up here. All right. Okay. There's 3. We're missing a 4th one. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Yeah. Yeah. Josh says there is time for questions. If you want to ask questions of me or any of the other, why don't you come on up? Iris and Claire and Abby, come on up if anybody has questions or just wants to tell a story or hear a story. Yeah, we have a few minutes. There are also books for sale, and I will also take a short moment for a little bit of promotion. That where I met Abby and I went with Claire was kayaking in San Juan's, a writing class called Writing the Non-Human, and there are spaces available for that and also for a raft trip on the Snake River. Well, we'll be doing writing on the Snake in the fall. So there are postcards around. So any questions for any of us? Anything you're thinking about? Here. I know. Must be utterly silent.
Claire, I want to remember what you said about appreciating. You want more than just appreciating yourself. It's part of your introduction that we're at a place where we have to appreciate what we do because not everyone really appreciates.
Oh, about when I was talking about like nursing and teaching and other careers and yeah, I feel like there are a lot of these jobs, vocations, careers, whatever you want to call them, that basically make our world go round. Coincidentally, a lot of them traditionally female careers, not trail work, but the other ones, where it's just kind of been assumed that people do them because they care so much that they don't care about how little they get paid. Like, it's like, like the whole thing with trail work or wilderness rangering, whatever, people always say, you get paid in some sense. And like, that's cool for a summer or two when you're like 21.
Yeah, right.
But for all of these careers, institutional knowledge, experience, technical skill, being able to pass that on to other generations is so important. And if you want people to stay in that for a lifetime, like, you have to just freaking pay them enough. Like you can't just get people to volunteer. Like you have to just pay people a living wage.
Question about that list that went around.
Yes.
Can we all get our
That's
hands
what
on
we want to do. We will type it in, and then how will they find access to where we put it? Josh, the QR code, or is it we can make a okay, all right. Yes, that is the whole point thereof.
your books to it too? You four, add your books to it.
Well, our books, there's a sheet where you came in where we wrote down ours. So we prepared, but yeah, we will type that in and find a way to get that for all of you. And thanks for asking that, Amy, because that's the whole
We know
point.
where to find you.
Randy.
Make sure you get that.
There's e-newsletter that's going out next Wednesday.
Oh, beautiful.
If you aren't on our e-news, put your name on that list by the door.
There you go.
And we'll send it.
Excellent. So we'll get it in the e-news for next time around and sign up at the door. Love that. Yes.
Yes, first of all, appreciation as a person who works with children with disabilities, appreciation for all parents.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, Iris, do you miss the mountains?
I do,
Yeah.
and I live in the Salish Sea, and sometimes I feel a little guilty about longing for the mountains. I mean, there's this beautiful, beautiful landscape around me that I'm very grateful to live in. But there's something about the mountains for me which I've never been able to explain as a native Midwesterner. The first time I actually was Salt Lake City and the Oka Range surrounding that city, and I was there on a trip, and I really seriously thought about not getting back on the airplane going back to Evansville, Indiana. But I was a month away from graduating from nursing school and a few things like that.
You made it. You made it.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And the first time we ever went to Stehekin, camping at the state park and then doing the day trip, I don't know. I mean, I just felt like there is a connection here really deep, and I do miss that. There's, we have hills and can see the mountains from Lopez, but it's not the same. So I'm grateful to have a chance to come over to places like this. And we took a little walk today, and it's just like we said, oh, these smells.
Yeah.
It's different. The sea smells beautiful, and the mountains, the forests, yeah. And I was appreciating the work of the trail crew.
Yeah.
Trail episode today. So what's your favorite hike?
Oh, you really gonna do that? You're gonna go there. We're gonna make Claire go first.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, my stock answer is Buck Creek.
Yeah.
Up in the Glacier Peak Wilderness, just like spent a lot of time on that trail, almost all of it for work. The one time I went there not for work was with my mom, which was so fun. Best view of Glacier Peak I've ever seen.
Yeah, I will just piggyback on that. I think the walk from Buck Creek to Miners Ridge is the most beautiful walk I've ever been on.
Haven't done that part,
Yeah. Next step. Abby, you got a favorite hike?
Yeah, well, so for 18 years I haven't hiked much. And I turned 50, and when I turned 49, I was going to hike every week until I turned 50. To hit 50 hikes before I turned 50 to rediscover hiking. But instead I tore a tendon. So I'm just now starting to plot a rediscovery of hiking. The last backpacking trip I did was the Timberline Trail around Mount Hood in the year before I got married, which was the year before I had kids. So yeah, it's been a minute since I've been out on trails a lot, but going back to Vermont where I grew up, a nice little Wheeler Mountain that you could hike up and down an hour before work. And I go to work because the mountains are small there.
Nice. You got a favorite, Iris?
Well, I mean, Stehekin just offered so many right out our door, and a lot that didn't even have names. But whenever we go back, we always do the Agnes Creek Trail, right? Which is, I don't know,
nothing spectacular, but
Oh,
it is. I mean,
Agnes Creek or Agnes Gorge?
Agnes Creek.
Agnes Creek, okay. That's an unconventional choice. The Gorge. The Gorge? Yeah.
Agnes Gorge, yeah.
The Gorge, there we go. All right, okay.
You're clearly a very conventional person, so.
And did you answer that question?
I did because I piggybacked on Claire, right? Yeah,
Of course,
yeah,
of course.
so, yeah, that's very right. If you don't have other questions, there are books here. Take a look at the books. We're happy to sign books. We're happy to talk with you one-on-one, and please share your stories with one another. We barely got time at the beginning, but thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate everybody.